Welcome to Desk, the digital electronic supply chain channel on LinkedIn. Our goal is to provide useful and independent information about the entire electronics components market from design to end of life, with a strong focus, of course, on digitalization of the electronic supply chain. My name is Georg Steinberger, and my guest today is an expert on sustainability for the electronic supply chain. Welcome, Sue Furtunato-Esbach, Sustainability Lead at Assent, one of the leading data providers for components data. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here with you today.
Thank you very much. Hey, Sue, the evergreen first question in my interviews here on Desk is, could you please give us a 30-second elevator pitch on Assent?
Yeah, so Assent is a company that helps manufacturers collect data on the presence of hazardous substances in their supply chain to help them comply with EU and North American product law on material compliance, as well as helping them with their sustainability by collecting data on ESG risk, so environmental and social governance risk in their supply chain, and rolling that up to help them to report to stakeholders.
Okay, good. So we got that right now. Your company is one of the eminent data providers for the component industry. So I know your company for many, many years. But your specialty compared to others are data related to environmental regulations, particularly here in the European Union. Can you give us an idea of how this has influenced the components market over the last 15 to 20 years, let's say, with the beginning of RoHS and WE and later on to REACH?
Yeah. That's really fascinating. You know, when RoHS just came out, people or manufacturers said you can't manufacture electronic equipment without lead. And look where we are now. The first RoHS was 2002. It's 21 years later, and there's been such a big influence on technological development and the invention of substances, new substances, to circumvent limitations that have been set by the likes of RoHS and REACH restrictions. And especially if you look at lead and chromium-6, so the impact on the supply chain for these specific substances has been immense. The manufacturers, so component manufacturers, had to adapt to find alternatives. So if you think about like chromium-6, for example, that has always used to be used as surface treatment technology in cockpits, they had to replace that with other like biological natural pigments, yellow pigments. And, you know, when you think about batteries, who remembers the days when every single portable battery had the PB sign underneath the crossed out wheelie bin, right? Because
sure.
all portable batteries had lead in them. And now almost all of the lead has been phased out. And in fact, with our brand new batteries regulation in the EU that just came out, lead will be restricted in portable batteries from August 2024 next year. So yeah, a big impact.
Okay. In terms of obsolescence?
In terms of obsolescence management, it's really key that the manufacturers of the components work together with the manufacturers of the final equipment to find alternatives to the restricted substances. Because the final equipment manufacturers, they cannot buy those components from the component manufacturers if they contain the restricted substances. So for them, that's an obsolescence risk, because if they don't have the right components, they cannot manufacture their products. Therefore, the component manufacturers and the OEMs have to work together to find alternatives. And that's that's the whole effect that we've seen with, for example, chromium-6 and lead in the last 20 years.
Yeah. Okay. You know, Sourceability is a global distributor, and we deal with obsolescence and finding alternative parts and so as a daily business. From our distribution perspective, the gap between the requirements and the available data looks really huge. Sometimes it really resembles a Swiss cheese. And I wonder, how do you think is the supply chain currently handling the topic of environmental data in your opinion? I'm saying that because from my experience over the last 25 years, it always has been, oh my God, we need to do something about it. And it has very rarely been, I would say, a professional, consistent approach. In the meantime, it may have changed due to the help of companies like Assent, But how do you see that situation in the supply chain with regards to environmental data? Has it improved, in your opinion, and what actually do you think needs to happen?
Yeah, so data management in the supply chain has really always been a nightmare. If you think about how long or how deep the supply chain is, how the data needs to flow from the tier X supplier all the way down to the manufacturer of the final equipment, it's a real challenge for all economic operators in the supply chain, and especially for small and medium enterprises who manufacture the final equipment that has to comply with the law, but then they don't necessarily always have the resources to invest in proper product compliance. And therefore, it's really important that you have a good software solution or a good product compliance management system that collects data from your supply chain and really have that right contractual agreements in place with your suppliers to obligate them to provide information to you. And that's where distributors come in, because Sourceability is a distributor, but often we see distributors being some of the main problematic economic operators because price is often an issue. Distribution is all about offsetting costs, and there's always the price pressure on the component manufacturers. Right, they're the manufacturers of the original components. They then sell to the distributors who push the price down. Distributors themselves don't really make enough effort or put enough effort into product compliance. And then the OEM, if he buys from the distributor, then there's a missing or gap in the information available. So we really do feel that as Assent, we try and work with distributors actually to improve their availability of information, to get the information that there's, when you think about how the information or the data on the product compliance should flow from the components manufactured to the OEM, that it doesn't end up in a void when it comes, when it reaches the distributor. That's why we really try and work with distributors to try and improve the situation. And distributors themselves, they should also invest more time and effort and resources in order to improve the flow of information on material compliance for example, for RoHS compliance and for REACH compliance.
Okay. Do you see a difference in the state of maturity between manufacturers, distributors, and customers, specifically, for example, EMS industry?
Well, yeah, actually, this links up with what I just said, because distributors are at least in a sense, experienced with all our hundreds of customers. They are the least mature because of a lack of knowledge, because of, like I said, that price war, really to get the price down. Not willing to spend enough resources on obtaining information on the material compliance of the component from the component manufacturer. So, because they don't want to invest in systems. And then when it comes to component manufacturers, that's a mixed bag. You get component manufacturers who are big manufacturers in themselves, big companies with a lot of turnover, who have a lot of maturity because they have enough resources to invest in material compliance. They're very knowledgeable. But then you also get smaller component manufacturers that struggle to get the right budget to invest in material compliance. And then if you have the OEM, OEMs are typically, so the bigger ones are typically very knowledgeable and have good product compliance programs in place. But this is the whole point with material compliance. The material compliance or the sustainability of a product should actually be reflected in the price of the product.
What I realized from a customer's perspective was that specifically the bigger ones, the bigger OEMs like Siemens and so are trying to set their own standards. So every customer has its own standards. That is sometimes a problem for distributors, probably also for manufacturers, because you cannot really maintain 25 different standards in parallel from a reporting perspective. So there is, in my opinion, a need to get people to the table to find a better standard formatting on reporting environmental data. You can actually help here quite a lot.
When it comes to product compliance, except for the IPC 1752, which is a format to collect data on material compliance, which is used in industry, except for that, there's not really a standard format, and that is problematic. And it's much more helpful for suppliers to use one industry standard, because then it's much easier for them to submit data to many different customers.
Absolutely. So that's what I was actually hinting at. But let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about the future. So the environmental topic seems to influence the industry even more in the near-term future. The catchword is PFAS, for example. How do you think that will really provide new challenges, and what does it mean in terms of obsolescence of parts? Will we see a new wave of obsolescence just driven by regulatory decisions, not like in the past, just changes, technical changes, but also now environmentally driven obsolescence?
Yeah, PFAS is a huge topic. Everybody's talking about it. For those listening who don't know what PFAS are perfluoroalkyl substances, which are basically, they consist of a very strong carbon-fluor connection or binding, and that makes the substances or the materials that contain those substances extremely durable. So they are used, for example, they're water repellent, they grease or fat repellent, and they use, for example, in outdoor clothing to make it waterproof, or like in pans as a coating, as non-stick, or in machinery as in grease. It's very, very widely used. Also a lot in plastics. And so, with the proposed restriction to restrict PFAS in the EU under REACH Annex 17, that poses a really significant obsolescence risk for manufacturers, because if the PFAS are not available, or they are available but they're not allowed to be used in components manufactured in the EU or outside of the EU when they are being imported into the EU, then those components will not be able to be sold, right? Because they contain the substances that are restricted. And then the OEMs will find that they cannot manufacture their products anymore because they rely on those components. And it's not only that, it's also, if you think about not necessarily the product that is being placed on the market, but also the machinery that is used in the production plant that is used to manufacture the product. If you can't find a replacement part for your machine, then you won't, if your machine breaks down, you won't be able to manufacture your products that you want to place on the market. And then there's the third aspect, and this is really significant, what 3M, so 3M is one of the big chemical manufacturers of PFAS, and 3M made an announcement recently that they are going to phase out PFAS by the end of 2025, I think, or 26, because they have just had so many lawsuits by, just in Europe, the Belgian government had just come to a settlement of, I think, 500 million euros with 3M with their plant in Antwerp, because of the contamination of PFAS in the sea and the river system. So 3M is going to phase out manufacturing of PFAS. If that happens, then even if the PFAS would not be restricted in the EU, the component manufacturers won't be able to manufacture their components if no PFAS are available. So it's really significant, and that's why companies have to start working together to find alternatives to PFAS.
So that leads me exactly to the next question. So how can you do that? So if obsolescence becomes more critical, driven by just this one effect, and there are others as well, how to deal with this effectively? So it seems to become a paramount problem. And to be honest, the supply chain, to a large extent, distributors and contract manufacturers are, I would say, low margin service providers. How to afford that? How to deal with that in a really effective way? Any idea?
Yeah, that's really challenging, especially because of the cost issue. So the first thing to do is, where to start is to find out if there are actually PFAS in your products, in the components. And that data needs to come from the supply chain. So OEMs will have to find out from their suppliers if there are PFAS in their components. And then they will need to work together proactively with their suppliers. So let's just leave the distributor out of the equation, because that adds an additional layer of complexity when there's the middleman. If the OEM buys directly from the component manufacturer, then the two companies can work together in an R&D project, obviously with the right NDA in place and so on, to find alternatives and develop alternative components, or components that include alternative substances. And that is the way forward. And that's why I say leave the distributors out of the equation, because that makes it really hard when you have a distributor involved, because then there's no direct business relationship between the component manufacturer and the OEM.
I understand that, but on the other hand, if you look at distribution as a channel, it may only be 1/3 of the total market, but we are dealing with 99% of all customers. So I would say 90% of customers in the market are only buying through distribution. So for all of them, it's a major issue. I don't know if it's reasonable to leave distribution or EMS companies out, because otherwise you have a big gap.
I didn't mean that they shouldn't buy from them. I just meant, if we talk about PFAS, let's just leave them out of the equation, just to discuss what should you be doing in terms of collaborative project, R&D project to find alternatives. But we know the reality is that distributors are part of the supply chain, the middleman, and therefore there's also responsibility on distributors to, if the OEM requests information on the presence of PFAS from them, that they request it from the component manufacturers, and that they work together, because it's going to be as much their problem as it is the OEM's problem and the component manufacturer. If the components are not available because of obsolescence as a result of PFAS, sure, then the distributor won't be able to sell the components, right? So he's going to be as much impacted.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so this really has to take priority. So companies will have to inform their CFO, for example, if they have a CFO, to inform the CFO about this obsolescence risk and about the need to put some budget aside to be able to look at alternatives and work together with suppliers to find alternatives.
You see a major effort going on already here. So from your perspective as a data provider, you must have some better insight than we on the distribution side.
Yes, so there's a lot of our manufacturers that are of our clients who are manufacturers that have started collecting data on PFAS in anticipation of the restriction in the EU that will come. And there's also a lot of guidance out there. Guidance on, for example, from ChemSec, that is an NGO, on alternatives to PFAS in the electronics industry. And we provide those guidance documents to our customers, and they also work together through industry associations, like, for example, Assent Industry Association, Digital Europe. They working together to also take part in the public consultation that's running right now on the PFAS restriction, and look at alternatives, working together with suppliers. So, for example, if a customer has that ChemSec guide, he can, his R&D or materials engineering department can speak to suppliers and say, look, this is a list of well-known alternatives. Can we look at these in terms of replacing the PFAS?
That seems to be a perfect lead into the next question. So I drop the question about PCN, because I think in comparison to that problem, it is a rather standard procedure. Let's speak about data management with regards to that. So there is a project called Digital Product Passport on the way. So how do you see that from that perspective of more critical influence from regulatory decisions, and also from an obsolescence management part? What can Digital Product Passport play in that upcoming wave of obsolescence in our business?
Yes, so just quickly in terms of the PCN, I just want to mention that, product change certification, these kind of material compliance restrictions are basically, they act like a product change certification, because it becomes clear that you won't be able to use a specific substance in your component or in your product, and then that triggers a notification to everybody who is listening that you should be taking action to replace the substance in your part to prevent obsolescence. But so that's not PCN, that's not Assent's typical scope of work, so I can't comment too much on it, but yeah, material compliance really is closely linked to that. And Then getting to the ESPR, so and the digital product passport, that's really also a very fascinating topic that's happening right now in the EU. ESPR stands for Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, and this will be this is a proposed regulation that's currently in the legislative process in Brussels, which will require products or it will mandate sustainability at product level, and with that will be the digital product passport. And the digital product passport will be like they call it a digital twin, like a digital copy of the product with all sorts of information on the product that will be available in digital form on the internet, owned by the manufacturer. So this data, a lot of the data that needs to go into the digital product passport will come from the supply chain. So looking at one of the requirements of the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation is carbon footprinting, and that will be a requirement for products. So even products that can be seen as a component. Let's take electric motor. Electric motor is really a component, but it's also a product in its own right. And if the manufacturer of the electrical motor cannot do a carbon footprint for the motor, you will not be able to sell it on the market, because it's a market access requirement to comply with the ESPR.
So he will come around and turn to the components industry to provide the carbon footprint for components as well. Otherwise, the motor cannot be put together from a carbon footprint perspective.
Exactly, because you can't do a carbon footprint. If you do carbon footprinting, you have to look at scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. If he just does scope 1 and 2, his own operations and electricity and heating and stuff, that's okay, but that's not good enough for a full product carbon footprint. So therefore, he will look to a supply chain, exactly. And just looping back to the whole obsolescence issue, if the motor manufacturer does not comply and he doesn't have that carbon footprint available, he's not allowed to sell his motor, and then the OEM cannot manufacture his product if the motor is missing.
Yeah. I remember from my former employer a couple of years back, we tried to do a carbon footprint analysis on an embedded board. This was a major effort, and it really costs 5-digit euros to actually put it together somewhat, not completed, but with an approximation on what the actual carbon footprint is. But it was a major ordeal and very costly if you have to do that on every product. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So. But in terms of digital product passport, I'm wondering where that will stop, because our industry has, I would say, probably 200 million different parts that are used somewhat worldwide by many different customers. And 200 million parts, digital product passport, that's massive. I wonder how that somebody wants to handle that. It's ridiculous.
It is. So the digital product passport will be for the final product, like the laptop or the fridge or the, whatever. Yeah. Not necessarily the smaller components, not the screws or the relays or the switches, but they need information on the screws, exactly. Relays, and switches to be able to comply. So I know what you mean. There's this tidal wave of environmental legislation coming out of Brussels, and it's really challenging for manufacturers to keep up. And looking at the policy perspective, Brussels is doing it because we have climate goals that we need to achieve, right? But it's difficult for manufacturers to follow and to come back to what you said about the cost involved. That's why it's important to have, like, if in terms of carbon footprinting, it's important to have a solution. Like, you need software for that. You definitely need software that's scalable. Otherwise, that's a manual task that is just absolutely too time consuming. You cannot do it manually. And if you don't have the actual data, you need to use averages from a database to be able to do a product carbon footprint. So it is definitely time consuming, and you need to automate it.
So that will be the next cost and work wave for the channel, for the supply chain, to manage the digital product passport, or let's say the collateral requirements that are coming from it for the upstream supply chain. So, but that almost answered my final question. If you had to set prioritize for digitalizing the component supply chain, where would you start? You probably would start at the digital product passport or the CO2 footprint to make sure that we are not missing any near-term goals. So 7 years are not so far away. The first benchmarks on CO2 footprint and so on.
No, definitely not. And actually, for some products, it's even closer. For the new batteries regulations, so electric vehicle batteries, they have to do carbon footprinting from August 2025 already. So it's only 2 years that they have, whereas the ESPR is still a long way away because it's not been enacted yet. But so I think it's important to have a standardization as much as possible. So industry standards to be used. If everybody does their own thing, it makes it so much harder. And there's a lot of collaboration that needs to take place. And this can only be in a non-competitive way. It's not only the OEMs working together with the component manufacturers to find alternatives. It's also OEMs working together with OEMs, even though they are competitors. And a good example of this is the IMDS database, which was it was a group of automotive manufacturers or car manufacturers, so the big players, like Volkswagen and BMW, working together with other car manufacturers to establish this database in order to comply with the requirements of the End-of-Life Vehicles Directive. And this is a real success story. So it is possible to work together in a non-competitive way to establish or set up a database or to work towards standardization in order to help the effort to make it easier for everybody to be able to comply with these requirements.
Well, the mistake with IMDS, in my opinion, in the beginning was that it was mainly used as a liability tool. And I think that cannot happen in this case, because I can tell you immediately that the channel will not participate if it's just used to do finger pointing in another direction. So if cooperation is needed, I think it needs to be at a high level and non-competitive and not with any, let's say, hidden agenda like liability. Who do you think is in the lead on that, so that we, from a distribution perspective, can actually get into discussions with other supply chain partners? Who is in the lead on driving this forward from an industry perspective?
I would say that should happen at industry association level. And looking
Digital
at
Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So looking at industry associations that are big players in Europe. Okay. So Digital Europe is, the members of Digital Europe, it's publicly available, are all competitors, right? Like a Lenovo and an Apple and a Dell. And but all these companies can come together and through their trade association can influence the standardization so that all companies have the same data to report and the same have the same template to use to get data from their supply chain, to make it easier for the suppliers to pass on information down the supply chain.
Excellent. I think that was a great final message, greater collaboration in the supply chain. Sue, I thank you very much for your time. You'll see yourself and me on digital electronic supply chain in a couple of weeks. And I really enjoyed that. And thanks a lot for this abundant information. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And I do have to say, I forgot to mention at the beginning, this was a collaborative effort with my colleague, Marcus Schneider. So it's important also to give credit to him. He helped me a lot with, just discussing how, because these questions were really, really interesting. And how can we tackle this? And it's important to brainstorm.
Thank you very much.